You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org. When your goal is to help animals reach their full potential, health matters. Diamond V offers a fresh perspective on animal health, a perspective that supports gut health, strengthens immunity, and ultimately enhances performance. For those who choose to invest in keeping healthy animals healthy, feeding Diamond V makes a statement about another dimension of profit, where margins are measured by confidence in your future. To get a fresh perspective, visit diamondv.com, because animal health deserves a healthier approach.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm Connie Kuber with Connor Agriscience and Sealpro Silage Barrier Films. Be sure to subscribe and like this podcast and share it with your friends and your colleagues. So today we're going to talk about calves, and calves are an investment in the future of a dairy herd. They should be your best genetics and a promise for your future profitability. So taking care of them should be one of your top priorities. My guest is Dr. Matt Dodd of Diamond V, and he's here to offer his ideas on calf care and development. Matt, welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your career thus far and what makes you passionate about calf care.
Well, thank you, Connie. So as you said, I'm Dr. Matt Dodd. I am a veterinarian by training. I spent 19 years in private practice in Southeast Minnesota and Western Wisconsin, primarily doing dairy. And so 3.5 years ago, I joined Diamond V as part of their ruminant field technical specialist team. So I help about 10 sales reps in the Midwest region with their activities on farm, records, on-farm parlor audits, different things that they have going on, TMR audits, just trying to help our farms do the best that they can. In private practice as a veterinarian, calves are so important. It's the future. I think that's really the way it is, and it's that new life. And we see them come into that world and just want to take care of them and help them grow to the best that they can.
Well, let's just dive into the subject here. Tell us more about the concept of productive life and why those first 60 days are so crucial.
Yeah, so productive life, not the genomic trait productive life, but productive life of the animal. So how long she is working for us in our dairies. You know, as we look at productive life, it really is this working to have healthy, productive cows for a longer period of time. And so that we don't need as many heifers maybe in the system, but yet have these animals that are healthy, producing more milk as they go through their lactations into that 4th, 5th, 6th lactation even, and maybe even older. But just trying to make that mature herd and really get more milk and fat and protein and everything else out of these animals as they are working for us to move forward. And so as we look at that, the first 60 days or even the first day is where it all starts. We need to give her the ability to express those genomics and genetic potentials that we've given her and let her grow into this beautiful cow that then goes in to make milk for hopefully, 5, 6 lactations through this process. So it all starts in that first stage of growth.
We know that there's a lot of challenges in those first 60 days of life and in that first day of life, like you said. there's a lot of challenges, especially these next few months are going to be very critical for calves to be able to survive that first day or week as we get colder temperatures and fluctuating temperatures that we see. I'm in California, so out west we see a lot of that kind of thing. So anyway, those first 60 days are a challenge. So what are some of the main challenges that they do see and what's causing them?
Well, I think as we look at any calf program, there's always that challenge of scours and of respiratory disease within those first 60 days. It comes back to there's probably some sort of an organism, either a virus or a bacteria or protozoa that are really starting to cause us those challenges with the scouring side. But we do have some nutritional management challenges that animals go through also. And so from a scour standpoint, it really starts with being clean and just getting those calves off day one. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about colostrum through this process, but really that first 2 hours of life in colostrum and getting that immune system jump started for that calf. Break into that respiratory side. A lot of it is some sort of a virus or bacteria that's bringing that challenge, but it's also leading from maybe that scour event. That calf's a little bit off on energy. The whole immune system is just using that energy, and so it's at risk for that next disease of respiratory disease that goes through that. So really, we just want to work to try and lessen the stress level of these calves as they go through every day, that challenges that they face day in and day out, and just helping them through that. To me, a lot of it comes back to nutrition, looking at that. These animals need that extra amount of energy to grow, but as they have these challenges in their lives, that energy then goes to that immune system to fight those challenges that they have. And then that pulls back from our growth that we really want through this first 60-day period.
You had mentioned cleanliness in there. And what can you tell us about where calves are born? They're born in a variety of conditions. So what would be ideal?
Oh, the ideal calving environment. Well, I guess what does Mother Nature do? They're out in some sort of a grass, spread away from all their friends. Mom seeks a lonely area to actually give birth so that she protects the herd, but then has that ability. But that also gives that calf a very clean environment because nobody else is around her. So as we get into our dairy farms, normally we're doing some sort of a group calving or individual calving pen. So we need that to be clean and dry, some sort of bedding. If it's going to be straw or corn stalks or sawdust or whatever you're using as a bedding source, it needs to be on that clean side where there's not manure everywhere that calf goes. Needs to be dry so that calf can have that environment, help its navel start to shrink up, get all these things. The reality is these calves are born in a dirty environment from a bacterial virus standpoint. They're all there, but how can we minimize that risk of transmitting it to that calf? And how can we help them deal with those challenges as we move forward?
And what about the cleanliness of the bottles or the tube feeding or something like that? What can you tell us about that?
All of that starts, as we move our calves away from mom. Now we are going to be at that artificial mother for her, and we're going to be feeding them through a bottle, through a tube feeder. That is very critical to have that clean, because we're putting that right into the animal's body. Specifically looking at colostrum, those tube feeders, those bottles early, that stomach is, quote, open to receive that IgA in to build that immune system. And so bacteria can also cross right into that bloodstream of our animals. And so making sure that we are disinfecting our tubers, our bottles, harvesting that colostrum cleanly and giving that as clean as possible to our babies that first 24 hours. Or the reality is the first 2 hours, we want that first dose of colostrum in. We'd love to see a second dose of colostrum products in that 8-hour period. And even a third dose in that first 24 hours, a great thing if we can accomplish it.
Okay. And going along with the cleanliness theme, what about ventilation in that calving area and in the first week of her life? Where does she need to be as far as ventilation goes?
Well, ventilation is always a tricky subject, just as you talked about your up and down temperatures. Here in Minnesota, where I'm at, we were about 15 degrees this morning, and we're looking at 48 here in the next day. So a big swing from below freezing to above freezing, and how does that play in it? Ventilation is critical for these calves to be able to keep clean air in front of them or around them. We don't want it so much that it's drafty and causes them to be chilled, because that adds another level of stress for them and requires more energy to keep them warm. But having that just right. And so it's very difficult when you talk our calving pens, because really our calving pens are going to be ventilated for the cow. And so we're going to move that calf out of that calving pen as soon as we can, because the ventilation is going to be too much for the calf there. During those first few days, a lot of these calves go into group housing maybe as they're born, and then get settled into their locations for the next 60 days as they're on milk. But those start to be, we still need fresh air. And so one of our challenges with ventilation in calves is a lot of times we stand up and we're 5 or 6 feet in the air, right? And we're breathing at that level. Our baby calf is down 6 inches off of that bedding. And if we have solid partitions in a calf barn, the air across the top of those partitions is often awesome. But what is it down at that calf level when we start sticking our nose down and sleeping right above that bedding? Is that ammonia building up? And we need some way to put air through those. Many different systems out there. If it's a tube system for minimum ventilation in the middle of winter, or ceiling fans to be able to push air down into those different calf rearing areas, those are all different ways that we can do this. And so it's not just a one size fits all situation. We really need to look at each individual situation, each facility, and how the air moves in those. But the reality is we just need to have fresh air coming into those animals at pretty much all times.
Right. So we need to kind of get on our hands and knees and see what it's like down there where the calf is actually at.
Absolutely. Those knees will show you a lot, because if your knees are wet, that's what that calf's living in all the time.
Yeah, that's true.
Just another one of those quick and dirty things.
You mentioned group housing for baby calves. So that's one of the big questions I have is individual hutches. That was the only way to do it. And now we talk about group and the feeding with the multiple number of nipples in a big container. So what's your opinion and what do you advise?
Yeah, I think the gold standard had been for quite a few years to have individual calf facilities where that calf kind of had their own micro environment. They didn't see friends. We interacted with them, but they didn't interact with the other animals in the group. And that has changed. We're looking at some of this paired housing where we start individually and go to groups of 2 or 3 or 4, how that works. More of our automated calf feeding systems where we're having groups of 12 to maybe 24 in a group, all using the same feeding system or the same nipple potentially. And those get to be challenges. I think all of these can work very well, but they take different management levels and different cleaning processes through that. And so they may not fit your management. That's kind of the hardest part. Somebody says, oh, it works really well for me. And you can find somebody else that says, oh, not working very well at all for me. We have to work through that management of each one of these different types of systems. That's really where it comes down to. There's not one perfect, but I think the future looks like we're going to be doing more groups. Maybe it's pairs, maybe it's just the full groups, but we can deal with that. We have success on facilities with it.
But when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, what do you suggest for the length of time that a calf needs to be by herself after she's left her mother?
I really don't think she needs to be by herself at all, to be honest.
Okay.
They sure can be.
Right.
If we're going into a group housing pen and we're going to end up with 15 calves in this pen, some farms are having a lot of success waiting for 14 days before they start grouping them up. They can individually monitor those animals a little bit closer and do that kind of thing. I have other farms that are putting them in to their groups on day 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And so very different, but it also takes a little more management. If you're putting that 2-day-old calf into a group situation, you really need to be observing and making sure they're getting up to get their meals, because if they don't, we're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And so each farm, again, it's that management and how they're choosing to do it. There's no perfect, but I have both sides of it, I guess. A couple of weeks old, 3 weeks old before they group, or 2 days.
Right. There's a lot of difference in behavior between a 2-day-old calf and a week-old calf.
Yes, there is.
What about exercise and having, the calves that are raised in a smaller area versus a larger pen? What do you feel about that?
These calves actually move around a lot in their hutches. Now, I'm not talking a calf crate where they can't turn around or those kinds of things. That's not on my wish list for a calf, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. But when we get a calf in her hutch where she's got her fenced in paneling out front, she's got a fair amount of room and she'll walk and turn around and lay. And you'll even see them kicking up their heels and doing those kinds of things in that pen also. Yeah, obviously in our group pens where there's a lot more combined space, probably per head, it's about the same amount of space, but they have that opportunity to kind of invade other people's other calf space. So those animals are moving around a little bit more. I actually just got done doing some filming work in a calf pen, trying to look at these interactions of what calves are doing and what outside noises are challenging them. Scaring them is the way I would probably say it, is a tractor drives by the pen, they don't know what's coming, these kinds of things. But very interesting on these different interactions. And so you see those calves licking each other, and you see those calves kind of chasing each other and playing. And I think those are all great things for just one, it's fun to watch, but
Yeah, it's always a fun day when you turn those calves out from an individual to a group pen and they're running around. That's one of my favorites. Yeah.
yes.
Have you run out of silage? Had to buy expensive, marked up feed to fill the gap? Maybe production's dropped due to lower dry matter intakes. Are molds or mycotoxins creeping through your piles or bunkers? And pitching the rot is a dangerous pain. Oxygen is the enemy. Pack it out, then keep it out with Sealpro, the professional grade silage barrier film protection chosen by top professional farmers like you. Make more, better, safer silage with Sealpro. Learn more at sealprosilage.com.
What do you suggest for the first week of life?
So I think this is one of the areas that people tend to rely on history. We've done it this way. We don't want to change. These calves will drink a lot of milk early in life if you allow them to. And on mom, they drink a lot. We let them do that. But a lot of times we start holding back these calves early on, and maybe you're trying to only give them 2 quarts twice a day. I don't think that's okay. I really try and get that to 3 quarts. And if you're going to really hit my goal, I would love to see them drinking, offered, I shouldn't say drinking, but offered probably a gallon at day 3 to 5 and doing that 2 or 3 times a day. I worked with some fantastic calf rearing systems where they're offered a gallon by day 5, and that's 3 times a day. And these calves have a lot of milk available to them, and they grow unbelievably through that process. But it doesn't work for every system. That's part of this challenge. You know, each system is a little different on how we can manage it and what that opportunity looks like. But there are opportunities to allow these animals to be very, very efficient in that process. They're in a very efficient animal in this early 60 days. Giving them that milk really allows them to see that growth both in the bone and their weight overall.
So what do you think is the impact of that first colostrum for the first 48, 72 hours on their productive life?
Colostrum is the number one indicator. We have to get colostrum in. That calf is born without an immune system. And so colostrum is the starting point for the immune system for the life of that animal. And there's so much data that supports that we have to get good quality colostrum into those animals, or we're going to have less productivity even in the first 60 days. You're going to have much more scours, more respiratory disease, more death loss in that early time frame, and just not allowing these animals to even make it into our herd as we move down the line.
If I feed a heavy milk diet for, like you're suggesting, for the first 60 days, you're suggesting then you wean them off at 60 days. Is that correct?
You don't have to, not by any means. I definitely don't want you to be feeding that type of a diet, say 3 gallons a day or allowing up to 3 gallons a day. Some people talk liters, so you're roughly that 12-liter range. You know, I don't want you to go from day 59 offering 12 liters or 3 gallons to day 60, 0. We need a long period of ramp down, especially on high milk diets. Those calves are not going to jump onto starter quite as early. And so I'd really like to see probably a 3-week ramp down from maximum to quote weaning, starting to drop that back and allowing them that time to start diving into that starter, getting that grain intake going. A lot of these calves, you know, as we look at them, we'll start picking at grain even within the first 10 days of life. But we need to build that process for them and that ability to build the rumen through this transition from milk off of milk. And that starter intake is really what helps build our rumen in that process. So stair stepping them down over a 3 weeks period is awesome. The more time we can give them to adjust to that less milk. For example, if you're feeding a gallon 3 times a day and you go to a gallon twice a day, you've just cut their milk by a third. Those calves aren't going to be happy. But if we pull back a little bit in all 3 of the feedings, maybe go to 3/4 of a gallon, they're still getting quite a bit, but it slowly pulls them back and they don't feel that stress of going right off of the milk, especially as we go from a fair amount of milk to cold turkey off. Right. Those are very stressful situations.
So talking more about this milk, what about the quality of milk? How do we test that, and how do we make sure that we've got the best quality milk that we can feed our calves?
Well, I mean, obviously we have whole milk and we have milk replacers. So both are great for the animals, just depending on what our availability is. If we're looking at a whole milk system, pulling it right out of the bulk tank is going to be the best option for the calf. Obviously, if it's clean enough for us to sell for human consumption, that is going to be an awesome product for that calf also. If we're using some bulk tank milk and some maybe treated cow milk, those kinds of things, we always have those little bit of risk through the process. So pasteurization of that milk is going to be much more important to be able to pull back those bacteria counts, make sure it's as clean as possible going into our animals for that feed every given day. As we get into milk replacers, I mean, there's a lot of high quality milk replacers out there. There's so many different combinations of fats and proteins and what the sources of each of those are. You know, you're just going to work with your supplier to find that right product that fits for your calves. We see different groups of calves kind of thrive on some and not thrive on others. So working with your supplier is the critical thing there.
Pasteurized or not pasteurized?
Pasteurized.
Okay.
Reduces our risks. As we have unpasteurized milk, you know, we can have high bacterial counts going into that calf. They're eating that, going to upset that digestive system, cause us challenges through that whole process. And now that calf has to deal with potentially toxins from bacteria in the milk or just high levels of bacteria that are really going to be challenging their system. And the real part of it is that means immune system upregulation, and that means energy away from growth.
Right.
That immune system pulls that energy and we don't get the growth that we want out of these calves. And we have to keep them healthy. And that's the number one goal for us, is to have healthy calves go through this system.
So talking about immunity, one of the big things I think that we're fighting is BRD, Bovine Respiratory Disease. So what can you tell us about that and how we can help that animal in her immunity?
So as we look at bovine respiratory disease, it's just a lot of our bacterias that are causative agents are normal inhabitants of our upper respiratory tract, in our nasal passages, these kinds of things. So what allows them to then go to the lungs and cause our BRD itself? Our stresses, viruses, ventilation, these things that we've already kind of talked about all play into that process. And so I guess my real goal is trying to have these animals as healthy as possible for when they face this challenge. Every farm goes through these challenges. It's not, I don't think I've ever been to a farm that has never had a respiratory disease. We have ups and downs, and that's our goal, is to be in that down phase as often as possible. But I kind of go back to that calf, and I want to give it all the benefits that I can. As we look into what's out there, there's a lot of additives, and Diamond V has several of those additives that have science behind them. Studies showing that they're benefiting that calf and helping it deal with the challenges. I mean, Diamond V, we have one with our Smart Care product that looks at BRSV infections. We challenged calves with BRSV, and we saw them eat more, gain more weight, and have better lungs at the end of the infection. That's awesome. That's what we're looking for, is stuff that's out there that we can help these animals deal with it. We need to do our day-to-day management, keeping things as clean as possible, keeping these calves fed, doing all the things that we can. But we also like that kind of insurance in the background, helping them through the challenges that they face that we can't always fix.
Okay. So can you explain how that product works?
So our Smart Care product goes into milk or milk replacer. It's a milk soluble product. It's fed during that milk phase. And so what it is doing, as we've shown through some of this BRSV data and actually a mastitis challenge with our Nutritech product, it's going into the cellular level, going into the nucleus of the cells and actually changing gene expression or the proteins that are produced so that we get different reactions from the cell and eventually through this animal. As we specifically look at some of this BRSV work that we've done, we can see that the immune system is primed and ready from the systemic side, from our blood testing. It's out there searching, looking for that process. But then as we look inside the lung, we're actually we have our inflammation reduced as we're waiting there, hanging out, kind of ready, but almost a little bit down. But then as that infection came in, now we hit that infection very, very hard, required less of our white blood cells, our neutrophils specifically, to go contain that infection. And because we had less neutrophils in there, we ended up with this less damage overall in that process. And so we went in and fought that infection very quickly, return to normal, which is critical as we activate our immune system. We don't want this prolonged immune function going on and on and on that causes that chronic kind of down regulation of everything. We want it to hit it fast, hit it hard, and then return to normal. And that way these calves, and we showed that in that trial, we're able to move on and go back to eating, go back to having a healthier lung, and then doing better overall.
Okay, so is this something that's fed to them in a small dosage?
So Smart Care would be fed at a 1 gram rate on a daily basis. You can split it over your multiple feedings, or you can just feed it once a day. Either one works. And then we would typically come back with our products in our starters to help that digestion process in the rumen, or as that rumen develops also. This is something Diamond V is known for, is to doing these trials to understand how our products work and kind of bringing some of this information forward. We've got another trial that was done where we looked at milk production in the first lactation based on those first 60 days of Smart Care. We were able to show in that trial that calves were a little heavier at 120 days old, so they gained a little weight. That's awesome. But we showed a 25% reduction in respiratory disease. And then that correlated to 8.9 pounds of milk per day at 10 weeks into that first lactation. So that ability to have a healthier calf in those first 60 days correlated to quite a bit of milk in her first lactation that carried.
Well, very good. Well, thank you for all this information. We've talked about different things that we can do environmentally to take care of calves, through ventilation, through cleanliness, getting down on your hands and knees and checking to see what the air's like down there where those calves are, where their noses are. We've talked about nutrition and the colostrum and how important that is, and feeding milk. And we've also talked about some of the products that Diamond V offers to help with calves having having a more productive life and growing into cows that last 5 or 6 lactations.
Well, I think it's just critical to continue that process of talking about, as an industry, we spend a lot of time and money trying to create these future animals to grow our herd, to be our cows. And we have to take care of them and give them that best opportunity to express that genetic potential that they have. And so it's just working with your team. If it's on farm, your veterinarian, your nutritionist, working as a team to help these animals express those genetics that we're getting in there and just helping them deal with the day-to-day challenges that they face. That's our goal, is to continue to build this herd across the US, I guess I'd say.
Right. On that vein, what signs should we be training our calf crew to look for?
So as we look for on the scouring side, those are going to be calves with very loose manure, probably not drinking their bottles or their feed as fast. Maybe even at the further stages, they're going to be laying down. They can't even get up. So we want to find them before that. But that loose animal that's really backing off its feed, when we look at we look at diarrhea, that's that calf. As we get into the respiratory side, it's that calf that's probably just breathing heavier, watching how it's breathing. Ears will be down. Sometimes we've got snotty noses. Sometimes we've got droopy eyes. But really watching that respiratory pattern, how it's breathing compared to the one standing next to it. There's great things out there in the industry. Dr. Sheila McGirt created the respiratory score charts that has you look at eyes, ears, nose. As we get down that, we can take temperatures and we can involve some listening of lungs and different things at levels. But the reality is we can probably do a lot of that just with our eyes, picking that calf up. And sometimes it's working with our team to show them, okay, this is what normal looks like.
Right.
Because you can't find abnormal or sickness until you know what normal is. So working through normal, helping them understand, okay, now this calf isn't normal. What's different in this calf? What are we seeing? How do we see that? That's a lot of what I try and do.
All right. Well, thank you again, Matt, for joining us. We've been listening to Dr. Matt Dodd, who is with Diamond V. If listeners want more information, where should they go and how do they contact you?
They can go to diamondv.com. That's a great place to find some more information. And we have a way there to kind of get through everybody to reach out and do that process. So that's probably the best way.
Okay. All right. Well, listeners, go have a great day. This is Connie Kuber with Agriscience and Sealpro silage barrier film. You've been listening to the DairyVoice podcast by Dairy Business News. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast, like it, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And we'll see you again next time.